beneath an endless Arctic sky, where ice once stretched in uninterrupted white plains. A new chapter in nature's story has begun, as the summer sun dipped toward the horizon in hues of rose and lavender. Scientists gathered beside a small helicopter pad on the shore of Hudson Bay, there to witness something both astonishing and unsettling. A lone cub, its coat streaked with muddy brown and patches of pristine white, stood nestled between two researchers. Its fur pattern spoke of an unexpected lineage, a living testament to a changing world. This was a Pizzly, the offspring of a polar bear and a grizzly. The air was crisp, carrying the tang of sea and thawing tundra. Cameras recorded every movement, capturing the cub's uncertain gait as it tested the ground beneath its paws. Its eyes, dark and curious, shifted between the faces around it and the vast expanse of melting ice beyond. For centuries, polar bears roamed these coasts alone, masters of ice and sea, while grizzlies kept to forests and mountain foothills far to the south. Now, here in this liminal zone where thawing permafrost meets open water, their worlds overlapped, and on that silent runway, the hybrid cub took its first steps. A team of wildlife geneticists and ecologists stood close by, voices hushed with a mixture of excitement and gravity. Dr. Samantha Lee, whose work in bear genomics has charted the shifting boundaries of species, leaned forward to inspect the cub's coat. In her hand she held a small vial containing a blood sample taken earlier, its pale contents ready for analysis. The very existence of this cub reframes our understanding of Arctic ecosystems, she said, voice soft but firm. It shows that as sea ice recedes, polar bears are forced ashore more often, encountering grizzlies that have moved north in search of new foraging grounds. The consequences ripple through genetics, behavior, and conservation. Her colleague, ecologist Dr. Eric Nord, spread out a series of maps and satellite images on a folding table. Each map traced the retreat of sea ice over recent decades, a mosaic of blue ocean where once there had been sheet after sheet of ice. Lines marked the increasing overlap of polar bear territory and grizzly range, converging in the coastal Arctic zones. Climate change isn't just about temperature, he explained, tapping a point on the map. It's about rewiring habitats. These bears are meeting now in ways they never have before. Where they once followed separate tracks, their trails now cross, and, as we see, sometimes merge. A hush fell as the cub stumbled, its brown-flecked paws slipping on wet rock. The researchers moved in unison to steady it, offering gentle hands and calming words. The cub's mother, a huge bear with the stocky shoulders of a grizzly and the creamy white head of a polar, watched protectively from a safe distance, her gaze alert and intelligent. A second adult bear, more heavily coated in white with faint brown shoulders, lingered nearby, the Pizzly's father, an uncertain mix of species traits, illustrating the complex genetics at play. Later, back in a mobile lab warmed by diesel heaters and humming with equipment, Dr. Lee began the process of DNA extraction. Under stark fluorescent lights, she pipetted minute droplets into a sequencer, each representing fragments of the cub's genetic code. Across the lab bench, glass slides held hair samples, blood smears, and cells swabbed from the bear's muzzles, evidence of a lineage unlike any catalogued before. We'll look for polar bear mitochondrial DNA, she explained as she worked. Alongside grizzly nuclear markers, the ratio will tell us not only that hybridization occurred, but how many generations back the lineage extends. This cub could be a first-generation Pizzly, or part of a line we've never known existed. Outside, the sky deepened into Arctic dusk, and project-lead Maribel Olsen gathered the team for a graphics briefing. On a large screen, animated sequences portrayed the expansion of grizzly populations northward, herds following the retreat of forests, drawn by the promise of berries and even human refuse at remote campsites. Polar bears, now denied the year-round platform of solid ice, were forced inland to scavenge or to follow caribou herds. Where their territories overlapped, the animations showed encounters, sometimes tense standoffs, sometimes skittish retreats. Then, in a single frame, two silhouettes approached one another with curiosity rather than aggression, merging into the shape of a hybrid cub. The graphics are powerful, Maribel said quietly, voice echoing in the lab's cool air. But they need to be anchored in science. This isn't a dystopian fantasy, it's a reality unfolding as we watch. Our mission is to document it thoroughly, through field observation, genetic analysis, and long-term monitoring. Only then can we advise conservation efforts that respect both species' needs. In a landscape defined now by rapid change, as darkness settled, the lab's warmth and hum contrasted sharply with the Arctic chill beyond its insulated walls. The cub, now named Aurora by the field team, rested in a padded crate. Her mother coaxed into a nearby holding pen. Monitors tracked Aurora's heart rate and temperature, ensuring her health remained stable after the stress of capture and transport. Outside, overhead cameras kept vigil, ready to record any sign of the mother's restlessness or the father's approach. In the hush of that frozen night, the researchers reflected on the magnitude of their discovery. The Pizzly cub was more than a curiosity, she was a living symbol of ecological transformation. Her very existence challenged traditional species boundaries and demanded new frameworks for wildlife management. What would her future hold? Would she find acceptance among polar bear matrilines? Could she reproduce with either species, propagating a new hybrid lineage? And what of the broader Arctic ecology? Could it integrate these hybrids into a functional ecosystem? Or was their fate doomed by the relentless pace of climate change? These questions would form the foundation of the short documentary's narrative, a journey through interviews with leading scientists. The careful unfolding of genetic evidence, and the immersive graphics that chart the shifting boundaries of habitat. In the coming segments, viewers would travel from the mobile lab at Hudson Bay to the remote stations of western Alaska. From the lecture halls of polar research institutes to the heart of the thawing ice pack itself, following Aurora's story as both a singular cub and a herald of what may become a new chapter in Arctic wildlife. Continuous footage of her playing on ice floes, of scientists comparing DNA sequences on glowing screens, and of ancestors on both sides, towering grizzlies in boreal forests and regal polar bears on midnight sun ice, would weave together a tale of adaptation, of boundaries pushed and redefined, and of a world in flux. As the first part of this saga drew to a close, the lab fell silent save for the gentle beep of sequencers processing the cub's genetic code. Beyond its insulated walls, a lone wind turbocharged by the polar night whispered across snow dunes, carrying with it the promise that tomorrow, Aurora and her kind would continue to shape the story of an Arctic transformed, one coded gene at a time. Under the glow of fluorescent lamps in the mobile lab, the cub's genetic code began to unfold in streams of data, lines of A's, T's, C's, and G's cascading across the computer screen like a digital aurora. Dr. Lee sat back and watched the sequencer's progress bar inch forward, then clicked to open the mitochondrial DNA results. Here lay the mother's lineage, unmistakably polar bear. Every base pair matching reference sequences drawn from hundreds of wild Ursus maritimus females. Yet just below, in the nuclear DNA, lay a mosaic of Grizzly ancestry, distinct SNP markers inherited from Ursus arctos parent. The evidence was irrefutable. Aurora was a first-generation hybrid, a true Pizzly marking an unprecedented genetic convergence. Across the table, Dr. Nord unrolled a chart of heterozygosity levels. "See how those loci cluster," he said, tapping a highlighted region. "We're looking at a 1-2 punch of polar bear adaptations, insulation genes that regulate blubber deposition, layered atop Grizzly alleles associated with fat metabolism and bone density. In theory, that could give this cub a broader physiological toolkit for coping with warmer temperatures and variable prey availability." He paused, letting the gravity sink in. It's both a marvel and a warning. Nature is innovating, but under duress. With the genetic analysis underway, the team prepared to deepen the story in the field. A month later, a small documentary crew flew west to a coastal inlet in eastern Alaska, where another Pizzly had been photographed scavenging salmon carcasses among brown bears grappling with shifting salmon runs. Local indigenous subsistence hunters, from the Inupiat community of Kaktovik, shared oral histories of golden bears wandering from the north. Elder Nanook Talik described how, as a boy, he'd seen only pure white and pure brown bears. These new ones, they do not belong to only one family. They walk like ghosts, between worlds, His words offered a poignant counterpoint to the sterile lab data, reminding viewers that genetics alone cannot capture the cultural and ecological ripple effects of hybridization. Back in Alaska's autumn light, cinematographers captured brown bears and polar bears side by side, each species moving with its own gait, while overlays of satellite images showed the ocean's ice edge retreating by weeks each year. Motion graphics specialists then animated the shifting contours of habitat overlap, polylines demarcating Grizzly Range northward expansion. Merged with shrinking polar bear territory, the animation slowed as the two zones converged at the Kupik River Delta, morphing into a gradient of shared habitat where interbreeding became possible. Returning to the studio, the team wove these elements into a narrative. Interviews with GIS analysts who tracked sea ice concentration data. Sequences of Aurora's genetic profile unfolding in the lab. On-camera reflections by Inuit hunters. And sweeping drone shots of endless ice flows melting into open water. Throughout, a recurring question echoed. What does it mean when two once separate bear lineages begin to merge genetically? Conservation biologist Dr. Elise Chen weighed in, her voice calm but urgent. Under the Endangered Species Act, polar bears are listed as threatened. Grizzlies as least concern. Hybrids challenge our legal frameworks. Are pizzlies protected? If they carry polar genes? Yes. If grizzly genes predominate? No. We must rethink how we define species in a rapidly changing world. The film then shifts to graphic explorations of potential scenarios. In 1. Pizzlies inherit a suite of adaptive traits that allow them to thrive in fragmented ice forest mosaics, essentially becoming a bridge species sustaining predator roles in both marine and terrestrial food webs. In another, hybrids fare poorly, unable to exploit either deep-sea seals or forest ungulates efficiently, and dwindle into an evolutionary dead end. These projections, rendered as dynamic infographics, drove home the stakes. The pizzlies' fate could tip Arctic ecosystems toward resilience or collapse. In its final sequences, the documentary returned to Aurora, not as a lab specimen, but as a living, breathing emblem of ecological upheaval. Footage showed her, now several months older, venturing onto a remote ice floe, her hybrid coat catching the low winter sun. The camera's slow zoom captured her pause at a breathing hole, the hesitate strike of her paw, and the triumphant pull of a seal pup from the dark water. Behind her lay the genetic road mapped out in the lab. Before her stretched the vast uncertainties of a melting Arctic. In the closing interview, Dr. Lee looked directly into the camera. Aurora is more than a curiosity. She's a mirror reflecting the changes we've wrought on her world. Our choices now, in conservation policy, climate action, and habitat stewardship, will determine whether hybrids like her herald a new adaptive frontier or signal an ecosystem in freefall. The question isn't whether pizzlies should exist, it's what kind of world we will create for them and for ourselves. As the screen faded to black, the words, adaptation or extinction, our time of reckoning is now, appeared, followed by a call to action and resources for supporting Arctic conservation efforts. Continuous footage of drifting ice and a lone hybrid silhouette stood testament to a story still unfolding, one that demands our attention and our resolve. As the northern lights danced their emerald ribbons across the Arctic sky, our focus turned to the broader implications of pizzly emergence, not merely as anomalies but as harbingers of an ecosystem in upheaval. In a cramped research vessel moored at the edge of the Beaufort Sea, marine ecologist Dr. Nadia Hassan scanned her laptop's GIS overlays, mapping the shifting range of ringed seals against sea ice retreat. Her voice carried the weight of urgency as she explained how diminishing hunting grounds for polar bears forced more of them onto land and into contact with grizzlies that, following thawing tundra streams, had ventured farther north than ever before. This isn't an isolated event, she said over the hum of the vessel's generators. We're witnessing a wholesale rewiring of predator-prey dynamics. Footage cut to a drone's bird's-eye view of sprawling ice floes, now fragmented into a fine mosaic of open water and rotting ice patches. Overlay charts slid in, showing the acceleration of melt seasons over the past 2 decades. Against this backdrop, the Pizzly cub Aurora reappeared, captured on infrared camera navigating the thin crust of pack ice with surprising confidence. her gait a blend of polar bear surety and grizzly agility. Audio from the recording relayed the click of ice cracking beneath her weight as she tested new terrain, an echo of resilience against a shifting world. Back in the laboratory, geneticist Dr. Lee walked us through the next phase of analysis, whole genome sequencing. With pipettes and tiny reaction chambers, she amplified selected gene regions, those responsible for lipid metabolism, fur density, and cranial morphology, on a large monitor. Pulsating graphs illustrated allelic expression differences between puck white Ursus maritimus and russet Ursus arctos lineages. What we see here, she narrated, is evidence that hybridization is not a dead end but a potential source of novel genetic combinations. Aurora's hybrid genome could unlock new traits, perhaps improved tolerance for warmer water temperatures or varied food resources beyond seal blubber. The scene shifted to a roundtable of Arctic ecologists, biologists, and indigenous knowledge holders seated inside a timber conference hall. Elder Nanook Talik described ancestral lore passed down through generations, a time before industrial warming, when bear species remained distinct and separate. He spoke of a colleague, the mythic bear of lore that bridged ice and forest, and how witnessing Pizzlies conjured echoes of that legend. His hushed tone transformed the room, bridging science with cultural resonance. Our grandparents spoke of a mediator between realms. He said, perhaps Aurora is our living reminder that balance, once lost, can return in unexpected forms. Scientists then presented long-term camera trap data from den sites spanning Yukon to Ellesmere Island. Animated timelines illustrated early spring den emergence migrating northward by weeks each decade. In areas where both species overlap, camera trap images juxtaposed rust-brown grizzlies pawing at thawing riverbanks with ghostly polar bears emerging from dens. Dramatic freeze-frame stills captured moments of cautious co-presence. Two bears sniffing the same kelp drift lines or sharing a carcass of drifted whale blubber. Voiceover commentary highlighted that these interactions, once fatal confrontations, now sometimes end in guarded tolerance, especially among juvenile individuals. On a windswept tundra plateau, field team leader Mason Chu described their collar tracking efforts. Overhead, a Beechcraft King Air performed grid flights, dropping ultralight GPS tags via precision release mechanisms onto bears darting between ice flows. Mason pointed to a live tracking interface, colorful lines representing dozens of bears, including several hybrids. By monitoring movement paths, we can see whether Pizzlies adopt behaviors more like grizzlies, following berry blooms inland, or more like polar bears, raiding seal dens and traversing drift ice. This data is critical to forecasting their survival odds and advising protected area design. Interwoven through the documentary were intimate moments with Aurora's mother and the grizzly father, recorded on remote cameras at feeding grounds. In one sequence, the mother, her white coat dappled with mud, stood at a partially thawed seal breathing hole, while her mate, a powerful brown bear, foraged on kelp and shore ice. Their cub, caught in the middle, bounded between them, mimicking its mother's paw swiping and its father's lumbering gait. Commentary reflected on how natural selection might favor hybrids that combine strength in seal ambushing with versatility in terrestrial foraging. Policy experts then weighed in, examining the legal and ethical quandaries raised by Pizzlies. Under current wildlife legislation, hybrids occupy a gray area. Protections afforded to polar bears under treaty obligations may not automatically extend to an interspecies offspring. Conservation lawyer Ingrid Foster argued for updating statutes to recognize hybrid resilience as a conservation asset. We must craft dynamic policies that accommodate evolutionary processes, not hinder them. As habitats blur, species definitions must adapt. Graphic overlays detailed proposed amendments to international agreements, charting pathways for inclusive protection. In the closing segment, the camera returned to Aurora roaming a vast summer ice floe at midnight. The deep blue sky alight with aurora borealis. She paused at a narrow lead, peered into the dark water, and then plunged her paw beneath the surface, emerging with a silvery fish. The voiceover reflected, in Aurora's survival lay a lesson for humanity, that adaptability and cooperation, even across species boundaries, may be the keys to enduring an increasingly unpredictable planet. Text faded in, Our choices today will shape the Arctic's tomorrow. Species may blend, ecosystems may shift, but hope endures in the spirit of adaptation. The final shot melted into an expanse of drifting ice floes, inviting viewers to contemplate their role in the narrative of a changing world. As autumn's first frost settled into the drifting snow, the tale of pizzlies, these bare blends born of warming seas and shifting forests, continued to unfold across the vastness of the north. Research teams spread out, carrying collars and cameras into ragged fjords and tundra corridors, tracking new hybrids as they emerged in places long thought too cold for brown bears and too fragmented for polar bears alone. In camps ringed by remnant ice floes, scientists gathered nightly beneath wind-torn tarps to share sightings. A cinnamon-tinted bear foraging along a berry-strewn riverbank north of the treeline. A mottled cub trailing behind an adult of indeterminate hue on a besieged ice edge. A cluster of 3 hybrids digging among shell-strewn beaches in search of clams and kelp. Interviews with Inupiaq and Yupik hunters revealed that these pizzlies were gradually becoming woven into indigenous knowledge systems. Elders spoke of stirring dreams in which bear spirits blended the Arctic's dual domains, sea and forest, calling youth to honor the unity of land and ice, of tradition and transformation. Young hunters described watching these hybrids approach seal carcasses with a calculated patience, then drift inland to raid fox dens for eggs, echoing both polar leanings and grizzly opportunism. In one remote village, a gathering under bright northern lights saw families offer tobacco and seal oil to honor the spirits of both bear lineages, acknowledging that in their unity lay a promise of resilience. Meanwhile, geneticists back in the laboratory traced the first signs of a second hybrid generation. By comparing genome datasets, they identified pups whose mitochondrial DNA still mirrored polar mothers but whose nuclear markers bore a more complex mix of brown bear ancestry, clear evidence that first-generation pizzlies were now mating among themselves. And even with pure grizzlies drifting north, this emerging genetic tapestry suggested that, within a few generations, a genetically distinct bear form might arise, one neither truly polar nor fully brown, but uniquely adapted to the thawing and refreezing rhythms of a changing Arctic. Conservation planners wrestled with profound questions. Should these emerging hybrids be managed as a new species, warranting their own protections? Or should efforts focus on preserving the pure polar bear lineage, whose specialized adaptations to ice hunting placed it at greater risk? Policy forums convened in Oslo and Anchorage, filled with passionate debate. Some argued that protecting pizzlies offered hope. Their mixed heritage conferred dietary flexibility, berries in summer, clams on thawing shores, seals on residual pack ice, potentially easing the pressure on pure polar bears. Others warned that prioritizing hybrids risked further diluting the genetic integrity of an already threatened species. Amid these debates, field teams pressed on, collaring dozens more hybrids and documenting their movements with unprecedented resolution. Early morning flights over the Mackenzie Delta revealed hybrid tracks alongside porcupine footprints, caribou trails, and beluga carcass remains, evidence that pizzlies were now woven into the Arctic food web at multiple levels. Infrared cameras recorded them napping in den sites carved deep into snowbanks, lit by the glow of nearly limitless daylight, and fishing in freshwater streams once too remote for brown bears. One drone sequence captured a trio of hybrids pacing along a gravel spit, bodies casting long shadows as they undercut the frozen edge, paws sliding in unison on wet ice. In tandem, a team of behavioral ecologists recorded surprising social patterns. Where polar cubs once relied primarily on maternal guidance, pizzly cubs were observed approaching both parents interchangeably, following brown bear fathers into berry patches and polar bear mothers to seal holes. Their play bouts, tossing chunks of ice like balls, wrestling along the shore's edge, blended the rough and tumble of grizzlies with the fluid, waterborne games of polar cubs. These hybrid youngsters seemed unconstrained by rigid species norms, freely exploring two worlds and modeling a new behavioral repertoire for survival in a mosaic environment. As winter deepened and the ice edge advanced again, documentary filmmakers returned to Aurora, now nearly 2 years old, tracking her across wide expanses of shifting flows. They captured breathtaking moments in time, Aurora plunging from an ice ledge into a dark seal hole lead. Surfacing with a slippery pup clutched between her powerful jaws, then bounding ashore and racing across a snow dune to a thicket of coastal willows where she foraged for browsing twigs. Voiceover narration reflected on how, in Aurora's hybrid anatomy, her dense white undercoat shielding her from bracing water, her robust brown bear musculature propelling her across uneven tundra, lay the living blueprint of adaptation. The final act of this unfolding saga turned toward our own responsibilities. Scenes shifted to classrooms in Oslo, Vancouver, and Anchorage, where students studied Pizzly ecology in real time, modeling climate scenarios and habitat corridors in computer labs. Citizen science apps enabled Arctic travelers to upload bear sightings, photographs, and GPS waypoints, expanding the scope of monitoring far beyond what any one team could achieve. Indigenous co-management councils incorporated Pizzly research into wildlife regulations, balancing subsistence hunting rights with the need to safeguard fragile genetic lineages. In its closing moments, the documentary returned to the cub that had started it all. Aurora, now a sleek adolescent, stood at the edge of a sprawling floe under a sky swirled with green and violet auroras. She lifted her head, sniffing the drifting air, and then trotted off toward a broken ice ledge where a lone seal pup surfaced. The camera held on her retreating form as the voiceover intoned a final message. In the DNA of hybrids like Aurora lies a testament to nature's resilience, and to our shared choice. Will we protect the shifting boundaries that nurture new life, or cling to the past until it vanishes like ice beneath the sun? The future of the Arctic depends on the answer we choose today. The screen faded to black, leaving viewers with haunting, silent images of drifting ice and the solitary silhouette of a pizza, an enduring symbol of adaptation at the edge of a warming world. The late spring sun glinted off fractured floes as our cameras captured the young Pizzly cub, now called Aurora, standing at the ragged boundary where sea and land collide. Behind her, a panorama of open water, shattered ice, and distant peaks spoke to a world in transition. As she padded forward, tentative at first and then with growing confidence, we heard the soft rumble of our narrator setting the scene. This is the culmination of a story that began with an overturned balance, one wrought by retreating ice, shifting species, and the resilience of life adapting on the edge. Cut to the glow-lit faces of conservationists gathered around a field lab table. Dr. Lee held up the latest genome graphs, now comparing second-generation hybrid markers to both polar and grizzly reference lines. She spoke with quiet excitement. Aurora's DNA bears the hallmarks of both lineages. Yet we're seeing novel combinations, genes for fat storage and bone density mixing with those for fur insulation and sensory acuity. In a warming Arctic, this hybrid genome may equip her descendants for patchwork habitats that no single species could conquer alone. The film then shifted seamlessly to sweeping drone footage of tie-up bays and river deltas where cinnamon-tinted bears and pale-furred bears moved side by side. Biologist Dr. Nord's voiceover explained how camera trap data revealed a rise in mixed-coat individuals foraging among melting permafrost ponds and wooded shorelines. Where grizzlies once paused at the treeline, he said, and polar bears lingered on the ice edge, now each follows the other's trails. Their meeting places have become crucibles for evolution. An intimate sequence showed Aurora first surfacing beside her pure polar mother in a seal hole, then later trailing a burly brown bear into a coastal willow thicket. Night vision footage captured her scaling a rocky bluff, her lean rump lit by starlight, as she sniffed at berries and insects. That duality, ice hunter and forest scavenger, made clear the new ecological niche hybrids may fill, one that spans both marine and terrestrial food webs. Interspersed were interviews with indigenous knowledge holders, Elder Talek again, reflecting on Akalik the mediator, the bear spirit of legend who bridged land and sea. Winter and summer, he spoke of ceremonies to honor adaptation, of community councils crafting harvest quotas that now consider hybrid bears as part of their stewardship. Our laws come from listening to the land, Talek intoned. When the land changes, our laws must change too. The narrative then wove in policy discussions, footage from international negotiation halls where delegates spoke of amending the Polar Bear Treaty to include hybrid protections. Conservation lawyer Ingrid Foster appeared on screen, outlining proposed language to recognize Arctic Ursus hybrids as a conservation unit. Graphic overlays showed voting results, treaty maps expanding, and interactive timelines charting progress toward an inclusive framework. Returning to Aurora, now older and more confident. The documentary followed her as she dug deep winter dens in snowdrifts, rehearsing the maternal behaviors of her polar ancestry, then emerged months later to follow brown bear-style salmon runs. Her cubs, 2 mottled little ones, frolicked at her side, replicating the dual lessons of seal hunting and berry picking. Parent offspring camera collars recorded lullabies of mutual play, paw taps in fluffy snow, synchronized dips in icy pools, and shared feasts at carcasses of both marine and terrestrial prey. In the final sequences, we cut between Aurora's family and other hybrid lineages, buzzards of cinnamon meeting ghosts of white across tens of kilometers and multiple watersheds. A chorus of voices, scientists, elders, policymakers, and even tourism guides, echoed the same refrain. We are witnessing life forging new paths under a rapidly changing sky. As the camera climbed above the floes one last time, capturing a patchwork world in transition, the narrator's voice returned, in the loom of evolution. The Pizzly stands as both question and answer, a living testimony that life adapts. Boundaries shift, and hope can take unexpected forms. Yet the choice remains ours, to safeguard the shifting canvas that nurtures such innovation, or to let the ice vanish without record. The future of Aurora's world, and ours, depends on that choice. The screen faded to black, leaving viewers with a final call to action. Links to conservation initiatives, guidance on carbon reduction, and an invitation to support indigenous-led stewardship. In the hush that followed, the faint echo of Arctic wind carried one last image, the silhouette of a Pizzly cub against the dawn horizon. Stepping forward into the unknown, both heir and architect of a new Arctic frontier.